Answered your own question. Okay, so let's review a little bit of what we went over last week. It's pretty simple, but there are some moving parts that are a little bit different from the other projects that we've accomplished in the past. So last week you were asked to do a whole bunch of green screening from some assets that I gave you, and then some assets that came directly from the Hollywood camera site. These are good assets, all professionally filmed. However, one of the things that we get are these guys, right? Was ist das? What are all these things over here? PNGs. They're individual images, right? They're individual frames from an entire sequence. This is called an image sequence. And we love, if not prefer, working with image sequences in the visual effects and 3D animation industry, okay? Importing these image sequences into After Effects is not difficult. However, it is different. It is different. So let me show you the import procedure. Let me just navigate to the right folder here. All right. So here's all the green screen plate stuff that you worked with last week, okay? And how do I import this image sequence in as a self-contained sequence in After Effects? Yeah, the first one. The first one. Just click on that first one. Yeah, and just triple check. 9 times out of 10, I'd say 9.8 times out of 10, that box is going to be checked on. But just double check it. Just make sure that PNG sequence is enabled. After Effects is a pretty intelligent system. It's scanned that entire folder and it's recognized that there's a pattern. Okay?
Although I was trying to import just a single image on something, I forget what it was, and it really truly was a single image, and I didn't realize it was checked, and it was like, it doesn't look like that.
Oops. Right, yeah. Okay, so there it is. And now that it's in After Effects, it's going to behave just like any other file that we've worked with this entire semester. So it's identical in function going forward to that of an MOV, an AVI, a JPEG. I mean, they're identical. Yeah.
Just saying,
Oops.
even though it says PNG, it's not.
It's not a what?
It's a video.
It's an image sequence. Yeah, it's an image sequence, and you know, pay attention to the icon. The icon is a really good indicator as to what type of asset you're working with here in After Effects, and that's the image sequence icon. The other thing for me that just kind of screams the image sequence is the range of frames that's illustrated in the file name, right? It goes from 0 to frame 470. We're only going to see that when working with an image sequence. Also, the details in the bin give you a lot of information, and it, again, reinforces the idea that we're working with an image sequence. Most importantly, this duration in the frames per second. Okay, so here's the asset. Going all matrix this week. I'm continuing to celebrate the whole cyberpunk theme, right? Just tied it in, yeah. These probably will not be. Yeah, these probably will not be. Okay, so walk me through the process of removing this green screen. I've made a new comp from this asset, yeah. Garbage mat. Now, what's the function of this garbage mat? You got it. You got it. Because as you can see on the production film plate here, there's a lot of extraneous junk on this shot. Is this okay to have that junk on set? Yeah, it's okay. We can do this, right? Because we only truly care about the green pixels immediately surrounding our actor. I don't care there's a concrete post in there. I don't care there's dolly tracks or a mic stand. I don't care because I can garbage mat all that out. Good question. Great question. Great question. Yeah. And if you look very, very carefully, so we have, you're talking about these guys, Jess? Yeah. So we have a whole bunch of little pink, and they really are sticky notes on this little microphone stand. In addition, look towards the background. Do you see all those weird geometric shapes on the actual screen itself? Those, in addition to the pink flags on the mic stand, are tracking markers, okay? Now, if you fundamentally look at the actual plate itself, the camera that filmed our actress doing her little action move here is on a dolly, right? And that dolly is changing its position within the scene, and as it's going forward on the track, the dolly is tilting, or excuse me, it's doing a pan to focus on our actress. Whenever we physically move our camera within inside of our scene, I have to recreate that movement digitally with my 3D camera, okay? So I'm basically recreating, or I need to recreate the practical camera move in the computer, okay? Because I have to create a whole series of background elements that match that camera move precisely. Because my 3D camera has to move at the exact same speed, orientation, and position as the practical camera that was used to create this film shot. Purple flag, or the pink flag, and those little geometric patterns are three-dimensional tracking markers that allow some very, very sophisticated software to quickly go in, calculate and understand all these shots, and solve for a 3D camera. This really crazy process is called match moving, and it's pretty high-end. There's a lot of really great software out there that will get you into doing this. I wish we had the time and the resources to really explore match moving in a big way. We want to be able to move our cameras around whenever we're filming things because the shot's going to be more dynamic, it's going to be more interesting, and it gives a whole much more creative freedom to tell our stories. However, whenever we move our camera on set, I have to move a digital camera as well in order to make sure everything lines up. That three-dimensional background has to have the exact same camera move when we render it as the practical camera did on set. That's the function of all of this stuff. Contrast. Contrast. Because what we're getting here on this mic stand is phenomenal parallax within the scene, okay? We can understand pretty easily the background, but the moment that you add in like a mic stand or something else that's on the same plane as your actor, we're kind of basically telling the computer, here's the foreground, the middle ground, and the background of our scene, and it's able to solve it more accurately. We want to try to feed as much information into the computer as we can so that the computer recreates this camera move as accurately as it can. Match moving is probably the most technical part of the digital art pipeline when it comes to visual effects. Okay, it is the most uncreative part of this entire industry. It really is. It's horrible. Actually, it's not horrible. I like doing it. It's actually a whole lot of fun. But I mean, it's super technical. And the software, there's a whole suite of software that allows you to do this. One of which I'm very happy that was just released. Autodesk purchased an app called Match Mover through an acquisition a number of years ago, and they just released Match Mover for free because they're not doing anything with it. And it's great because Match Mover was a phenomenal app, and now it's free. So there's a free alternative for Mac and PC called Match Mover from Autodesk. They can download it right now for free. It's great. And then if you want like what the big dogs are doing, the big feature film guys are using software that runs, and I'm not joking, about $10,000 a pop. Match moving software at the high end is not inexpensive, but it's fantastic. I used to work on a project called Boujou, and Boujou I think is like right around $10,000 per seat, and man, it was like butter. It was awesome, man. You could throw basically anything at Boujou and it would recreate the camera move digitally for you. It's great. It's awesome. Anyways. Yeah, it's nothing. For a big feature film studio, it's nothing. That's chump change, right? They spend more in an hour, than the cost of the application. Yeah. All right. So let's garbage mat my little actress here. Now, Arthur mentioned at the beginning of class that he was finding himself in a situation where you're almost animating on a per frame basis, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we don't want to do that. Okay? But that's not the point. The point of a garbage mat is just to get rid of all of the extra stuff. So let me kind of revisit the technique that I illustrated last time. It's called bisecting.
So does that mean that we got maybe the map too close to the actor?
Definitely. Yeah. Definitely. If you were in a situation where you felt like that was your only option, you're too close. You're too close. It's one of those things where you have to figure out what's the best use of your time. At one point, you get committed in a pipeline, right? If you've spent an hour animating every single frame and you're almost done, it's better to spend the next 20 minutes doing exactly what you were doing before than to completely restart and spend another hour getting you back to where you were. So you got to figure out how you want to spend your time. Okay, let's match, or let's garbage mat this guy real fast. I'm going to do it with the pen tool, and I'm intentionally keeping this pretty basic, okay? Yeah, there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 points, okay? That's about all I want to do with an actor like this, okay? And I'm placing these points in some key areas. We're always going to need to have 1, probably 2 points to establish her feet in the bottom of the actor. Same for her head. I know that she's going to be doing a movement where she lifts her arm, so I'm going to need maybe 2 or 3 points in there to animate the mask to take in account for that movement. So just don't go crazy with the points, but you are going to need enough to get the job done. I'm going to go into my mask and change its color, because that little pink is not going to do it for me. That yellow's not working, or that blue. Let's make it yellow. Let's make it red. Should have just gone red initially. There we go. Now I can see it. All right. Oops. Okay. So let's. I want to make some adjustments here. So I think I initially created a little too close to her feet. Yeah, something like that. That's a good place to start. Okay. So let's bisect it. We're going to animate this mask. If we don't animate it, this is what's going to happen, right? It's going to look good, and then she pulls her arms up, and oh, that's a little bit of an issue for us. So we need to go in and move this mask around and lock in key poses within inside the sequence to ensure that we're masking out all that extraneous stuff on set. So in my mask, I'm going to go into Mask Path. I'll enable the stopwatch to preserve all the animation that I do on the mask. And now this is where the bisecting part comes in. I want to do as little animating on this thing as I possibly can. The focus is not to make a perfect mask. The focus is just to get rid of all that background stuff. I want the computer to help me as much as I can. It's going to interpolate between all these keyframes. I may get lucky in a couple moments here where it will interpolate correctly. So here's my technique. I've got a keyframe at the beginning. I want to go to the end and add another keyframe. I'm going to change the mask now to meet what I need. Something like this. Yeah, there we go. All right. So bisecting is I'm just going to place my playhead right in the middle, and I'm going to see what I get. Okay. I'll move my mask again. Let's see what I get. Yeah, there we go. And sometimes I'm going to get lucky. Yeah, look, for the most part, that's not horrible. There's obviously some things that I need to change. But there are certain areas, like this back half, I don't need to do any keyframing. So let's bisect the keyframes once again. And really what we're doing is that we're just trying to split the difference. So we had a keyframe on the first frame, a keyframe on the last frame. We bisected that, put our playhead in the center. We posed it out and got a new keyframe. Well, I'm going to kind of pick a side now. I want to put my playhead in between the middle of this one, the middle of this one, so right in here, and I'll repose my mask to get the coverage that I'm after. Yeah, see, look, I'm getting kind of lucky now. Some moments in here are working just fine, others are not. Now let's bisect that one and that one. And, looks like I don't necessarily need a keyframe right in the middle, but right in there I'm going to need a keyframe. So let's fix it. Now, I recognize firsthand that there are some mistakes, and the guys down at Hollywood Camera Work would tell you that they intentionally shot this with mistakes so that their visual effects artists would go in and clone out and kind of erase that little section. I'm not going to make you guys do that, because that would just be cruel and unusual. Yeah, and then we're just... It would, yeah. Yeah, I'm just trying not to do it on every frame here. Like, I'm going to fix it, like, right I'm always trying to find the highest point in the movement arc that our actress is doing. Yeah, like all of this stuff up here, this is unavoidable, so don't worry about it. I'm not going to do everything because it's like watching paint dry. It really is the most unstimulating thing on the face of the planet, but this is what we're after. This is really what we're trying to solve here, okay?
So there are a few seconds where you might have to have.
Yeah, there'll be clusters. It's not every single frame. You know, there may be 15 or 16 frames in here that have keyframes on it, but it's not, 300. Not 300. So just this is the goal. This is the goal. And now that we have all that extra stuff matted out, we can actually pull the green screen. Now, what effect are we going to use to pull the green screen on this thing?
Key light.
Key light.
Woo!
Key light is magical. It's fantastic. I love me some key light. Let's do it. It's under the Effect pull-down menu. Key light 1.2. All right, now walk me through the process of using this key. Yeah, it's the eyedropper, right? That's the first thing that we want to do. We want to define which color the computer is going to go through and make transparent. So the eyedropper under screen color is going to give us that option. Let's just do it real fast. And you're going to have to experiment with this. Be open to the idea of, kind of picking and choosing. You may want to go back in and try different colors around your actress to see if you get a better or worse result. So I'm going to do this maybe right around in there. Boom. And that's not, oops. And that's not half bad. We have some additions that we need to do here to our effect. The screen down here at the bottom is kind of turning out brown. That's not good, right? Here, let's change the background color to something a little bit more easy to see, like a middle gray. Yeah, so we have some changes, some modifications that we need to make to the effect to get rid of all that slop in the background. So what's the next step? Where do we need to go? Screen matte, absolutely. Let's see our screen matte, which is the alpha channel that's responsible for driving this key, by going into the View pull-down menu and choosing Screen Matte. If we look over at the composition viewer, there it is. There's the actual transparency channel that's responsible for pulling this key. And from our previous conversation about masks and matting, we know that anywhere that's white inside the alpha channel is going to produce an opacity value of what? Pop quiz. 100, right? Because white pixels reveal and black pixels do what? Conceal or hide, right? So we want to obviously see our actress. So on the interior of our actress, the goal is to get all those pixels white. And behind our actress on the screen, we need to push all of those color values to black. The Screen Matte section of options over here will give us that opportunity. Specifically, we're just going to mess around with Clip Black and Clip White. Both of these, think of this kind of like a really fancy levels call, right? Where we're physically adjusting the color value of the grayscale pixels in our Screen Matte. When we mess with Clip Black, we're going to start to shift all the colors inside of our alpha channel towards black. So anything that's kind of a medium gray will be changed into a darker gray, and darker and darker and darker until it reaches black. Let me zoom in here a little bit, and I'm just going to start dialing this up. This is a global operator, so we got to be careful. We're also messing around with the pixels on the inside of our actress, and you can see that there. So we don't want to overdrive this value. We have to be very careful. Small movements on both of these channels is really what we're after, and that's not half bad. Clip white is going to do the exact same thing, but instead of pushing all the grayscale values towards black, it's going to push them towards white. And this is our opportunity to go in and ensure that all the pixels on the interior of our actress have the transparency value that we're after, which is opaque, 100% opacity. Clip white. Just going to start dialing this down a little bit. Yeah, something maybe right around there. That's good. I don't want to go too far. That's pretty good. Let's view the final result once more. And there it is, folks. Not bad. That's a darn good key. Okay? It's a darn good key. We've removed the background. We've garbage matted out all that extraneous slop. And now we're left with just our actress alone by herself in the rest of our composition. A quick insertion of the background will give us the result that we're after. Here's the background plate. There it is, and it all lines up, and it's looking pretty good. Except for the part that I didn't garbage mat out. Okay, questions on this process? That's basically what we covered last week in about 10 minutes. Yeah, all right. Okay, let's talk about what we're going to be accomplishing this week. This week, we're going to spend our time talking a little bit about blend modes. Blend modes are an important part of everything that we do here in the visual effects world, and just in digital art in general. Blend modes play a critical, if not crucial, role to the in creating that final result. How many guys in here are blend mode ninjas? Use a lot of blend modes. Yeah. Luckily for us, the blend mode system that we're used to seeing in other image editing apps like Photoshop have made the trip over here into After Effects. It really is the exact same engine with the exact same math. I want to talk about some of the blend modes that are available to us, as they all have very unique roles and very different outcomes. This week in our homework and our lab assignment, we're going to be continuing our adventure in compositing by doing two things. Let's just go over to renderography real fast and revisit what we're doing. Our homework this week is going to be an additional composite. It's called F15 Flyover. Once again, all the assets for this shot is going to come directly from Hollywood Camera Work. I've even done you a really good solid. I've linked to all the assets that you'll need right here in renderography, so you can download them here. Or if you want it, you can just download them from Hollywood Camera Work. You are going to need all of those assets. There are a bunch of them this week. In every sense, this week's assignment is going to be a puzzle. Okay? And I'll start to introduce some of the concepts for this puzzle as we get closer to the end of the class. This is the grand test. If you've been on masks, matting, and track mats, okay? This is going to be a head scratcher. It really is, but not an impossible one. Not an impossible. I'll give you a little softball pitch hint towards the end of class just to get you going. To allow us to continue to work and to explore the role of blend modes, I have a fun little lab assignment for you. Download these lab assets, the Space Mechanic lab assets, if you haven't already. That way you can at least play along and kind of follow what I'm about to talk about here momentarily. Okay? So download them. They're going to be part of your lab assignment. We'll come back to what you're physically going to build here in a minute, but just go ahead and download them so at the very least you have the same assets that I have on my screen. I want to import in some of the Space Mechanic assets into the app here. And there are a bunch of them, okay? Really, you're going to get a whole series of image files and a QuickTime movie. There we go. All right. And I'm going to go find my background. It's in here somewhere. Did I not import it in? Hold on a sec. I did not import it in. All right, there's the background for this shot that we're going to work on. And let me just grab Diff Dome here. to give you an idea of what the outcome and the goal of all of this is, here's the assets, or here is one of the assets that we're going to be using to begin to composite all these elements together. Okay? As you can see, all these assets, yet again, have come from the computer. These are all computer generated, 3D modeled and rendered, and the computer artist has given us a whole series of separate passes for us to work with. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about the immense render requirement some of these big shots require, right? Think about Transformers, 48 hours a frame. What? Crazy, right? Often, whenever we're working with elements that are computer generated, we ask our CG artists to render out each shot in a whole series of passes. And I've given you some of those passes here. If you look at them, here's the exact same little spaceship with a really nice soft specular highlight at the top along the shoulders of the spacecraft. Here it is again where the specular highlight's been tightened up a little bit. Here's the shadow. We'll talk about how to work with this in a minute. Here's a version of our spaceship whose reflection is very, very sharp. You can actually see the background and the reflections. Here's the exact same thing, but the reflections are all blurred out. We want to work with these assets inside of After Effects because making a change at this level is really easy, right? In After Effects, I'm not having to go through the exact same render stage and render process as I am in my 3D apps. If I want to increase or decrease the amount of reflection on my object, well, here in After Effects, I just change the opacity slider or change the blend mode. It's a 2-second change whose render will be very, very quick. The alternative, if we didn't do this, would be to go all the way back to my 3D guy and ask him or her to produce a new render, which could take an hour to render just one frame. We're only working with one frame here. Ooh, right? What if this is like a 10-second animation? I only want to render that thing once. So by breaking it out into a whole series of component pieces, I can recompile that here in After Effects and continue doing my look development and art direction here in After Effects without having to go back to the most costly environment ever, also known as Max Maya or Modo. Okay? 3D apps are incredibly expensive to render within. So let's do let's do the hard part here in After Effects. We have an occlusion pass. We have some grungy stuff here. We have a lot of options that will allow us to go through and continue to refine the look of this spacecraft in a much easier environment. Then we have Diff Dome in our background. Okay. Diff Dome is actually going to be the base color of our object, okay? But it doesn't necessarily represent what... Let me rephrase that. Diff Dome is going to represent the base pass of our object, but it doesn't necessarily represent the color our spaceship has to be. What color is the spaceship right now?
Gray.
Gray, right? We like painting in shades of gray because the moment we start painting with shades of gray, we're able to adjust the colors of other layers based on the tonal value of that pass, right? White is white, black is black, middle gray is middle gray, but the moment you start shifting hues, things take on a whole new different kind of beast. Painting with gray gives us options. It really does on a much larger scheme. Thus enter the role of blend modes. Blend modes allow us to take two different layers, two separate different layers, and apply an algorithm, basically, that combines them into one. Okay? A lot of times you see this over in the image editing world, and it drives me absolutely crazy. Oh my gosh, it makes my blood boil when people do blending of layers incorrectly. Okay, this is what they do, and I apologize for deviating, but I think you'll understand the point that I'm after. Let me just import in an asset here. I'm going to go into my small texture library, and let's just do concrete. And I shouldn't be picky, but I am. Okay, Pat, don't be too picky here. That will work. Okay, so here's just an image of some concrete. All right, awesome, fantastic. Well, what if I want to do, I think I have, oh, please let me have, on my desktop. Here's my Starbucks logo, right? Now, my Starbucks logo currently has a white background. I'm just going to, let's put that in my, down over here. Okay, I'll make it small instead of After Effects. And I think I'm just going to produce a circular mask for this thing, just to make my life a little bit easier. Oops. How do I make a mask out of the what? I just selected the layer, and then I used the circle tool to make a mask. That's it. That's good enough. Okay, so there it is. Now I want to integrate this. I want to make it look like my Starbucks logo is just chilling on that wall, right? And here's what people often do, and it drives me absolutely batty, right? What's the rookie mistake that people always do when they try to integrate two layers together? Opacity. No, bad, horrible, boo. No, okay? Because this is what it's always going to look like. It's not going to look like it was spray painted onto the wall. It's going to look as though it's just been ghosted on top of the wall. That's silly, that's stupid, and it certainly doesn't look photoreal, right? Because if this image was actually spray painted on top of the wall, there'd be certain parts of this image that were lighter and darker, and those lightness and darkness values would match their corresponding value on the concrete, okay? Because we want the light part of the concrete to be the lighter parts on the Starbucks logo. And where it's dark on the concrete, we want it to be dark on the Starbucks logo. We don't get that just by reducing the opacity. Thus enter the role of blend modes. Okay? Blend modes are a more intelligent way. Oops, let me put this back up to 100%. Blend modes are a more intelligent way to combining images in any image editing application. We're very lucky to a certain degree that our industry has standardized around the basic math of blend modes. The blend modes that we're used to seeing in Photoshop, well, they're identical to the blend modes that we're seeing here in After Effects. And they behave very, very similar to the blend modes that we're used to seeing in like Final Cut Pro or Premiere Pro. I mean, they are as close to an industry standard, kind of series of rules that as we possibly can get. Okay? So yay, awesome. That makes my life a little bit easier. Now I have commonality between a number of different apps. So let's talk about the implementation of blend modes here in After Effects. You can see all of this stuff down in the timeline. We have a dedicated column called Mode, and that's where all the blend modes hang out. Now, if you don't see this in your interface, where is it? How can I get this? Because that you might not necessarily see, this column here. What magical button do I need to press to get that? Switches of modes, yeah, toggle switches of modes down here, okay? Yeah, if you press that button, notice that the interface in your timeline is going to change ever so slightly. See? These are all our quality switches. And then we click on that button, and now we get all of our modes, our blend modes, okay? So we have a pretty comprehensive list of blend modes that are at our disposal, and let's just spend some time going through every one of them. No, I'm not going to go through every one of them because we'd be here all night and you guys would just gouge your eyeballs out because it's just, right? No, it's not fun at all, right? It's really not fun. But there are some rock stars in this list. It's a little bit easier to see the categories over in Photoshop as the way the interface draws this menu is slightly different. But focus in, if you will. Maybe, let's see. Yeah, you zoom in, it's a little bit easier to see. There's actually subtle gray lines that breaks this entire list into categories, okay? Each one of these categories is really responsible for doing categorically one thing or another. Like we have an entire category whose sole purpose is to make our images lighter. Another one to make it darker. And then the overlay category here in the center is really going to start to change the color of our pixels based on the pixels of the other layer, okay? So if we go to the top of the list, these are all the blend modes that are really responsible for darkening our layers. These are going to add or lighten them up, okay? And then we have these down here, which are really going to start to change the colors of all of our of the pixels in our layers. So categories. Some of these I use a lot. Some of these I never use. Everyone's going to come at this list from a very different perspective. I'm a big believer that there really is no wrong way. There is your way. So if you prefer using soft light over overlay, yay, I think that's great. There's no problem with that as long as you're getting the result that you're after. All right, so let's talk about this for a second here. Let's see what happens. Now, before we go any further, and I apologize, let's just take an examination here of the colors that are on my Starbucks logo, okay? Of course, we have white, we have a kind of a mid-green, and then we have black on the inside. If we were to flip this image into a grayscale, that green would be very, 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 very close to a middle gray. Very, very close to a middle gray. So think of it like white, 50% gray, and then black. Okay. Let's start to look at some of the roles of these blend modes and how they're going to influence the transparency of the colors inside of this shot. If I do darken, what's happened here? Yeah, the white is disappearing. Now, a lot of people think that it's going to darken the layer, and it kind of isn't, okay? Some of the names of these blend modes can be a little misleading. They really, really can. But when you start looking, yeah, go ahead.
So does it just give it up the white? Or?
Kind of. Don't necessarily think about getting rid of the white. What it's doing here is it's going through and is finding all the pixels that are currently darker, okay? So we are blending, excuse me, we are blending this layer to this layer, the concrete, okay? The layer order no longer matters now. Now we're doing a straight up analysis of value, of color, saturation, and brightness, okay? When we choose the darker blend mode, you can see that the computer's going through and is finding all the pixels, okay? All the pixels that are darker than than the pixels below it. Let's see if I can find a really great illustration. Yeah, here's some right here, right? It's going through. You can see right here in the bottom of the R, we have a really, really dark spot on the concrete. Well, that's showing up a little bit transparent. The green is showing up a little bit more transparent now. And it's going through and it's trying to find all the dark pixels, and whatever the opposite of that color is, it's making it transparent.
Are modes animatable?
No, unfortunately not. Let's keep cruising. There's some in here. Multiply is another interesting one. Okay, multiply. Multiply, if you really think about it, all the color values in the computer have a number associated with them, right? The R, the G, and the R, the G, and the B channel have a fundamental value. Well, when we choose the multiply, we're taking those values and we're straight up doing a multiplication on it. Okay? So if this is the R channel, this is G, and this is B. On layer number A, this is layer number B. Okay, maybe on layer A, it's like 0, 2, and I'll keep the math 4. Okay? These are the color values for each one of the channels. And if B has, 1, 10, and I don't know, 4, it's physically multiplying these values together, and it's giving us new values for B. Okay, so it'd be 0, 20, and then 16. Whatever those values are. Okay, whatever those values are. So it's really doing the math algorithm here to drive the and to change the, in this case, the transparency of certain pixels. I use multiply a lot. It's a fast way for us to pop out all the white in a layer. Notice that all of the white now, including the portions of the green that had a little bit of white in it, have been made transparent. Blend modes, kind of like our layer mask systems, are entirely non-destructive. They allow us to go in and make global changes to a layer and continue to integrate them into the list. Let's do like add. Add is doing almost the exact opposite of multiply, where instead of doing a multiplication here, it's not multiplying it, it's physically adding these values together. And globally, they're getting brighter.
Says who?
Huh?
Says who?
Yeah. Says math. There's lighten. Lighten is doing pretty much the exact opposite of darken. Okay, exact opposite of darken. And the only pixels that are left on screen are the pixels that have a lighter value than the counterpart on the background. Screen is a great way to instantly get rid of all the dark values inside of your shot. You can see that the black area on the interior of my Starbucks logo has been completely made transparent, as is a lot of the information on that middle gray, because gray obviously has a lot of black in there. And any value that has what I think is below 50% gray is going to be made transparent based on its grayscale rate. So these two categories in here are really going to start to affect the brightness and transparency of our object. But the moment we start getting into like overlay and the difference category, the effect that we're going to simulate is very, very different. And now it's going to start to change actual hue and value for our pixels. And now we're starting to get there a little bit more, right? Even with this simple overlay blend mode, this is a far, far, far superior result than just to reducing the opacity of our object. You can see here on the interior of the text, we can start to see the highs and the low points of all the different tonal values, the brightness and darkness, if you will, of all the grays in that area. And it's feeling as though this logo is part of the concrete now. Yay, right? Rock and roll, that's what we want. That's what we want. So an overlay, and all of these other guys, they basically are doing the exact same thing as overlay, but they're doing it in kind of different fall-offs. Pin light and vivid light are always kind of fun. Vivid light is going to be really punchy, extraordinarily punchy. Really intense highs and very, very contrasty dark, 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 dark blacks in the background. Pin light, kind of fun. Hard mix. I don't think I've ever used hard mix. Difference is when it starts to get really wacky. I had mentioned earlier that the overlay category and the difference category are really going to start to go in and affect the hue of all of the pixels that are associated with the layer that we're blending. And difference is, difference and exclusion get really kind of fun to play with. But hey, maybe we want to rebrand Starbucks to pink. Here's exclusion. Exclusion actually does a really neat job in this particular situation, as we get this really neat weathering effect. If I deselect the layer, now we're making something that looks a little bit more integrated. It looks like it's been part of the concrete and is starting to take on some of the weathering effects that are inherent to the photograph that's underneath it. Yeah?
Are you able to apply multiple blend modes to one layer, like in Photoshop? You're able to kind of affect it with different?
Multiple blend modes to one layer. No. However, I have an alternative that we can talk about. Don't let me forget. There is something that may be able to get what you're after. So maybe. We'll come back to it. Blend modes allow us to kind of more predictably, look at Hugh. Hugh's kind of weird. More predictably start to affect the integration of all these different layers. Okay. Stencil alpha. These are now reading the actual alpha channels of the layers that it's blending. Since I masked out Starbucks logo with a circular mask, I created created alpha information in line with that mask, and this is what we're getting. So it's another way for us to kind of simulate the whole track matte system that we've been playing with earlier in the quarter. Here's the luminosity, which is pretty cool. Silhouette alpha, it's the opposite, and this is the opposite as well. Lots of fun stuff. So that's the power and the purpose and the role of blend modes inside of After Effects. Okay. D had a comment, and let me change this back to, let's keep it at normal. D had a comment of, is there a way that I can start to affect it on a number of different layers? Let's find out. The answer is maybe. Of course, we can always associate a blend mode with one of the layers inside of our comp, but there's a new layer type that we haven't explored yet that a lot of you guys are already familiar with, and it's the adjustment layer, right? Adjustment layers are alive and kicking here in After Effects, and they're really, really, really great. I like them a lot, okay? Let me show you how to make an adjustment layer. Layer, new, and there it is, adjustment layer. It really is just that easy. Does anyone know the role of an adjustment layer?
Yeah, apply more modes.
Apply more modes? In After Effects, or in Photoshop, how do we use adjustment layers?
Photoshop, it does it non-destructively.
Non-destructively way of adjusting a number of different things Where? How does it work? Art?
Below?
Below. It's the exact same structure that we're used to seeing in Photoshop. Any layer that's below the adjustment layer is going to be affected by the adjustment layer. Okay? And you'll see this in action here in about 2 seconds, right? Adjustment layers are a great way for us to globally affect large areas of our comp with effects. For me, an adjustment layer is nothing more than a container. That's all it is. It's a container that affects everything that's below it. However, it is a layer, though. So it's going to get all the first-class rights of a layer, meaning that we can animate it, we can mask it, we can track mat it, we can parent it, we can apply tracking data to it. So it extends its role and function a little bit further than what Photoshop is able to do. Fundamentally, though, it's going to do kind of the exact same thing. Let's do this. I want to apply, let's do this. I'm going to apply under the color correction category of effects, let's do a hue saturation. There we go. And I'm just going to dump down the saturation of this entire thing. So it's effect, color correction, hue saturation. So our containers here, our adjustment layers, they're nothing more than containers for effects. Okay, and these historically we put the type of effects that we put inside of adjustment layers are going to be helping us with the color. Okay, because often we'll want to shift entire sections of the color inside of our comp one way or another, right? An adjustment layer is a really great non-destructive way of doing this. Okay. Going back to our space mechanic thing, you're going to have like 8 or 9 layers in there, right? What if we want to make everything look as though it's on the planet Mars, okay? I'm not going to go in and do the exact same color correction on 9 different layers. I'm going to do it on one adjustment layer, and its effect is going to be applied to everything that's below it. I've done the hue saturation here, and you can see that everything in my comp has now gone black and white. And just trust me here. Yeah, if you look at the concrete, it's kind of this, got a lot of blue and a lot of red in there. So when I activate the hue saturation effect in my adjustment, everything's black and white. To illustrate that it's only affecting the areas that are below it inside the timeline, well, let's move our adjustment layer. Let's move it. Let's see what happens when we just move it down one. Now, the Starbucks logo is above the influence of the adjustment layer, and is not being fed that hue saturation effect. I use adjustment layers all the time. They're fantastic. So file, or a layer.
Oh, I think it was under effect.
Go to new, and then adjustment layer. There you go. Oh, I see, in the actual effect itself. Yeah, I got it. So the color range, this is master hue slider. Okay. Let me put my saturation back up to 0 here. And now you can start to affect. See how the colors in the background are shifting now? Yeah. Yeah, I'm shifting the color hue, and then I could colorize it and tint the entire thing by enabling colorize. And then I can globally shift it that way. The effects control panel? Yeah. It should automatically pop up whenever you apply an effect to any layer. If it doesn't, just go to the window, hold on menu. There it is, effects control. Then it should pop up where you.
I got that, but I got the box that is totally empty.
Well, did you apply an effect?
That adjustment layer.
Mm-hmm. Did you apply it? Did you have the adjustment layer selected?
Yeah, I do.
So you have no effects applied to your adjustment layer then?
I have to apply an additional effect.
Yeah, remember, an adjustment layer is just an empty container. That's all it is. You got to put stuff in there in order for it to do something.
Okay, so then I noticed for each layer, there's a check, there's a box that you can
So you're talking about this column right here? Yeah. This is just going to, this column allows us to basically kind of disable the effect or the application of the adjustment layer just for that one layer. In my very simple scene here, I don't think it's going to do anything. Did I accidentally delete my mask? Why did my mask turn off? Yeah. Turns it off completely. Yeah. I wonder if they've changed. I so very rarely touch this button. Effects applied to this layer. Apply the composite layers below it. In this particular situation, I'm not sure. Yeah, let's drive it. Let's really make it obvious here. And sometimes whenever I'm trying to troubleshoot a problem, I try to create a really, really obvious example so that I understand precisely what the machine's doing. Let me show you one of my favorite obvious examples that will help us understand the role of that little button. So I got my Starbucks logo selected, and this is not going to work very well, but it is what it is. Under, what is it? I gotta remember where it is. It's under generate, right? Generate, and then no. Oh, please tell me they haven't taken it. It's under simulation. CC hair. Yeah. I have never found a reason for this effect in After Effects, but it really is kind of fun. It allows us to create hair based on the color value of our object. Yeah, awesome. That's just the weirdest thing ever. I've never, ever used this. I will never, ever use this. But it really is kind of one of those entertaining things. You could even go in and like change the direction of the light. You know, what's really unfortunate is that someone down at Adobe probably spent a lot of time writing this plugin, and I'm absolutely convinced no one has ever used it in a production environment because it just really historically looks kind of silly, right? I don't get it at all. Man, it just looks kind of funky.
See, now when you click on that button,
Yeah.
it does change the layer below.
Yeah, it's applying it to the layer below. Well, I take that back. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that one. I'll be honest with you. I think I've touched that button like once in the past 15 years.
Well, on mine with what I have on my screen, it's obvious what happened.
It's passing the effect on layer number 1 onto the effect of layer number 2?
Yeah.
Do they both have to have them on? No. How come it's not doing it on mine? Grr. Well, either way. Let's keep cruising here. Crazy. Crazy deals, crazy times. So back to adjustment layers, because adjustment layers are pretty fantastic. Let's do it, adjustment layers. Now the great thing about adjustment layers is that they're first-class citizens. So anything that we can do to a normal layer, we can do to an adjustment layer. So I've created a new empty adjustment layer, and inside of that, I'm going to apply just a simple. Let's just do simple levels. It's an old school trick. I've been doing this forever. Levels is a really powerful effect. Levels is one of those effects that you see in a lot of different applications. And really what you're doing with the levels effect is that you're adjusting the distribution of color values along the color spectrum. And we actually get to see the distribution of all of those values in this little histogram. And this is the source of many, 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 many years of confusion. I remember when I was in y'all's shoes, I was ultimately stumped by this histogram because I just didn't understand it right. You get these, there's a mountain in the center, and I was like, what does this mean? And I remember my instructor saying, it's the distribution of color values along the color spectrum. And I was like, what does that mean, though? Well, here's what it means, okay? And let me change it ever so slightly. They actually added, this is really neat, actually, because they're breaking out the distribution of all the RG and B channels. It's kind of confusing. If you click this little dot, it goes back to the classic. And this is the one that you're used to seeing over in like Photoshop, right? So what do these mountains mean? These mountains represent the amount of pixels, okay? The computer's going in and it's physically counting all the pixels that have the exact same color. So on the left side of the histogram, pure black. On the right side of the histogram, pure white. So the computer is going through and it's counting all the pixels that have a color value of 255. And it's drawing us a graph, a vertical graph, to represent the amount of pixels inside that area of our color spectrum. So based on that information, I can see that I have a lot of pixels in the center of my color spectrum that are what color?
Gray.
Gray. We have a lot of gray, right? The majority of the pixels inside of this image are gray, okay, or are a mid-tone, because we're seeing the composite of the RGB channels right now. They're not necessarily gray, but they have a brightness value of somewhere in the middle. And then we have a lot of pixels over there that are white, and we have a lot of pixels that are black, but kind of in the 3/4 part, in this side of the graph, it's kind of a barren wasteland. We don't have a lot of pixels over there that represent that value. So levels allows us to change kind of like the start and end of that graph. I can clip all of the colors if I start to move these sliders around. So maybe I want to have, let me zoom out some. So if I start to do this, I'm clipping all the values now. I'm basically saying all of these color values, or all these brightness values, well, anything above this arrow is now 255 white. It's pure white. Anything, if I move this one over here, all of these values, all of these pixels that used to have a whole, nice kind of a gradient of values are now going to be pure black. And you can start to see that the brightness and the darkness areas of our images are getting more contrasty. You can also do this on a per channel basis. But we've been doing this for years, right? Levels is just a really phenomenal way of changing the distribution of color values across the entire image. I can globally make it brighter, can globally make it darker. This middle slider is the gamma, okay? So let's do this. I've been doing this for years, and it works really, really well. Move the gamma down a little bit, and I want to create a really cool vignette. Vignettes are phenomenal because they allow us to kind of create this tunneling effect. Vignettes naturally happen out there in the cinematography world, where the edges of the frame are a little bit darker, right? Well, I want to reproduce that effect here in After Effects simply with a single adjustment layer. I'm going to mask out this effect. It's pretty easy, okay? I really only am concerned in seeing the tunneling effect right here on the edges. So I just take my adjustment layer, grab my ellipse tool, and check it out. Maybe just drag out a mask, something like that, and I'll just invert it. Oops, excuse me. Invert my mask. And then on that mask, I'll just blur it a little bit by adding in a little bit of an edge feather. Something like that. Now the intensity of my adjustment layer is probably a little too intense for me. So I'm just going to go in, into the transform and just reduce the opacity of this layer to start to modulate the intensity of my vignette. Super, super simple, right? Adjustment layers are containers for effects that we can mask, that we can animate, and whose blend mode, she just walked out, can be changed. Question about adjustment layers. Global operators. clipped. What do you mean by clipped?
So that it only affects the layer that it's clipped to instead of everything below it.
Ooh. A clipping, we can mat it out. So we can produce a track mat for it. We can pre-comp it. Pre-comp it's a way of only affecting, yeah. Yeah, we can't do a clipping mask per se. Yeah, but the pre-comp would probably be the alternative, because then it's only going to affect the layer or layers that it's pre-comped with. It also is a factor, a player in our timeline. So as a first-class citizen, I can have my adjustment layer end halfway through my animation if I wanted it to. So if I place my adjustment layer over here, and it looks like I accidentally, oh shoot, it actually grabbed all of the images inside of my texture library and imported them as an image sequence. That's hilarious. That's what happens when I go fast. That's funny. That's really funny. It is kind of cool. It's kind of entertaining. Kind of looks like satellite pictures from space. Anyways, so you can absolutely have the effects of your adjustment layer end at certain points within inside your scene. They can be turned on and off. All right, questions, and I apologize for going a little bit long on adjustment layers, but they're really neat. I use them all the time. Global operators, that's just the way I think about them. There are layers that affect everything in my scene, and I can isolate it by either changing their position or matting/masking it out. Lots of options. Use them, love them, they're awesome. They're really quite good. Okay, questions, comments? Let's take a break. I've been yakking for almost an hour and a half. Let's take a break. And thus endeth the live stream, by the way, too. Yes.